They believed they were saving the Republic. They raised their daggers, convinced that one man's death would restore freedom to Rome, but instead of glory. Every one of them found only ruin. This is not just the story of Julius Caesar's assassination. It is the story of how each conspirator met a fate more tragic than the man they killed. The lesson is clear. Those who betray destiny will find that destiny, in turn, betrays them. Epic orchestral strings build, images flash, daggers gleaming, Caesar collapsing beneath marble columns, and Roman battlefields soaked in blood and despair. 1. The plot and the first blow. Rome. 44 BC. The Republic trembles under the weight of ambition. Julius Caesar, victor of Gaul, master strategist, beloved by the people, has returned from war, crowned with honors, but whispers ripple through the Senate. Is he not already a king in everything but name? To the senators who cling to the old ideals of the Republic, Caesar's power looks like a dagger poised above their throats. And so, in the shadow of marble columns, more than 60 senators gather. They call themselves liberators, but history would call them something else: conspirators. Among them stands Publius Ceruleus Casca, the man who will strike first. He is not a leader of men, nor a great general, but fate has chosen him to ignite the storm. On the morning of the Ides of March, as Caesar enters the Senate hall, Casca feels the weight of history in his trembling hand. Caesar takes his seat upon the curule chair, the symbol of Rome's authority. The senators circle him like wolves. Then Julius Caesar tugs Caesar's toga signal. In that frozen instant, time shatters. Casca lunges. His dagger flashes and plunges toward Caesar's neck. The wound is shallow, but it is enough. The spell of hesitation is broken. Rome itself seems to gasp as steel erupts from every direction. Casca, who believed himself the hand of liberation, would not live to savor victory. 2 years later, at the Battle of Philippi, when the armies of Brutus and Cassius clashed against those of Octavian and Mark Antony, Casca's courage failed. Surrounded, he chose the coward's escape. He drove his own blade into his body, the same blade with which he had betrayed Caesar. And beside him, in history, stands Julius Caesar, the man who pulled Caesar's toga and set the daggers loose. He too fell at Philippi, crushed under the weight of retribution. The very battlefield that was meant to preserve the Republic became the grave of its so-called liberators. The irony could not be sharper. Those who struck the first blow believed they were saving Rome, yet in reality they had opened the floodgates to chaos. Their reward was not the crown of heroism, but the silence of unmarked graves. Coups to Brutus and Cassius, the soul of the conspiracy. If Casca was the hand that struck first, then Brutus and Cassius were the soul of the plot. Without them, the assassination would have been nothing more than a desperate act of violence. With them, it became a declaration of betrayal so profound that Rome itself would never forget. Brutus, the betrayal of a son, Marcus Junius. Brutus was no ordinary senator. To Caesar, he was almost a son. Caesar had pardoned Brutus after the Civil War, showered him with honors, trusted him beyond reason. Ancient whispers claimed that Brutus might even have been Caesar's blood. True or not, Caesar believed in him, and that belief became the knife that cut deepest. On the Ides of March, as the daggers fell upon him, Caesar struggled to rise. He fought against the storm, his eyes scanning the faces of those he once called allies. And then he saw Brutus. In that moment, history froze. The great general who had faced 1,000 enemies could not raise his hand against this one man. His lips parted in disbelief. Et Brute. Those words would echo through eternity, but for Brutus, they were not the end. They were the beginning of his undoing. 2 years later, on the plains of Philippi, Brutus' armies clashed with those of Octavian and Mark Antony. Rome trembled as civil war consumed the Republic. Brutus fought bravely, but fate had already cast its verdict. Surrounded, betrayed by fortune itself, Brutus chose not to fall to an enemy's sword. Instead, he threw himself upon his own blade, the very blade gifted by Caesar in friendship. His last act was not victory, but surrender to the weight of his guilt. Cassius, the general of treachery, if Brutus was the face of the conspiracy, then Gaius Cassius Longinus was its heart. A seasoned general, Cassius was no stranger to ambition. He despised Caesar, not only for his power, but for what he believed Caesar represented: monarchy, tyranny, the death of the Republic. It was Cassius who organized, persuaded, and fanned the flames of rebellion. At Philippi, Cassius commanded legions, his eyes ever sharp, his mind calculating. But even the keenest strategist can be blinded by despair. On the second day of battle, Cassius looked across the field and believed he saw his troops overwhelmed, his lines broken. In truth, the fight was not yet lost, but Cassius' heart was. In desperation, he ordered a loyal servant to plunge a dagger into him. The general, who thought himself the savior of Rome, died not in triumph, but in delusion. The tragic symbol, Brutus and Cassius, the so-called liberators, became symbols not of freedom, but of futility. Their rebellion ended in blood and ashes, their names forever chained to betrayal. The Republic they claimed to save collapsed into the very empire they feared, rising from the corpse of Caesar they had struck down. 3. The fates of the other conspirators. The spotlight of history often lingers on Brutus and Cassius. But they were not alone. Behind them stood dozens of senators, men who once raised their hands in Rome's halls of power, only to be crushed by the tide of vengeance. Their names are not carved in marble like Caesar's, but their fates are etched into the darker pages of Rome's story. Decimus, Brutus, the friend who betrayed. Among the conspirators, perhaps none cut deeper than Decimus, Junius, Brutus, Albinus. He had been one of Caesar's closest allies, a man the dictator trusted as a friend and commander. It was Decimus who persuaded Caesar to attend the Senate on that fateful day, whispering reassurance when omens and warnings should have kept him away. Without Decimus, Caesar might never have walked into the trap. But betrayal is a double-edged sword. After Caesar's death, Decimus attempted to hold power in Gaul, yet his name had become a curse. Marcus Antonius branded him a traitor, and in the chaos that followed, Decimus was hunted down, captured, and executed. The man who once led Caesar to his death was dragged to his own like a criminal, forgotten even by those who once conspired beside him. Trebonius and Julius, the butchered pawns. Then there was Gaius Trebonius, who had distracted Mark Antony during the assassination, keeping Caesar's staunchest ally away from the Senate chamber. Without Trebonius, Antony might have stood beside Caesar, sword in hand, changing the course of history. For his role, Trebonius was branded a traitor and met a horrifying fate, captured by Dolabella. He was tortured, butchered, and beheaded. Beside him in infamy stood Lucius Tullius, another hand that had struck at Caesar. He, too, fell into Dolabella's grip, and like Trebonius, his death was not swift or noble, but drawn-out proof that betrayal does not buy mercy. Sulpicius Galba, stripped of legacy. Servius Sulpicius Galba, another conspirator, thought himself clever enough to survive the storm. But Rome was no longer safe for Caesar's killers. When Octavian rose to power, Galba's name was placed on the dreaded proscription list, death sentences carved into law. His life was taken, his fortunes seized, his legacy erased. To betray Caesar was to erase yourself from history. Cassius Parmensis, the last survivor. Perhaps the most haunting story is that of Cassius Parmensis, the last surviving conspirator. For years he evaded justice, fleeing across seas, clinging to the fading hope that he had escaped Rome's wrath. But fate does not forget. In time, Octavian's men hunted him down. He was executed without ceremony, the final ember of the conspiracy snuffed out, the unnamed and forgotten. Others, Aquila, Minucius, Basilo, Ligurius, and more fell in battle or died in exile, their names fading like shadows. Each believed they were striking for liberty. Each found only the silence of an unmarked grave. The verdict of history: not one conspirator lived to see peace. Not one died with honor. They thought themselves saviors, but history called them traitors. The republic they killed for collapsed into the empire they feared. Their lives were the price of their own delusion. For the legacy of betrayal when the daggers fell upon Julius Caesar, the conspirators believed they were saving the republic. In their eyes, they were restoring liberty, tearing down the shadow of monarchy before it could take root. But history has its own sense of irony. Their blades did not resurrect the republic, they dug its grave. The fire unleashed in the days after the assassination, Rome was paralyzed. The senators who had once cheered in the Forum now recoiled in fear, knowing the people's fury could sweep them away. The citizens who adored Caesar filled the streets with grief and rage. It was not freedom they set, was treachery. Into this storm stepped Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal ally. With a voice that shook the Forum, Antony turned mourning into fire. His funeral oration did not just weep for Caesar. It condemned the conspirators before the eyes of the people. He raised Caesar's bloodied togamart with dark stains, read aloud the names of those who had struck. The crowd's sorrow transformed into fury. In that moment, the conspirators lost not only Rome's trust, but Rome itself. The wars that followed, what followed was not liberty, but war. The assassins fled, but the Republic pursued them with a vengeance. At Philippi, Brutus and Cassius led their legions into battle against Antony and Octavian. Their defeat was swift, their suicides tragic. Their deaths were not noble sacrifices, but desperate escapes from the judgment of history. Other conspirators scattered like broken pieces of glass. Some were executed, others hunted, their fortunes seized, their families ruined. None found peace. The republic they claimed to defend crumbled in their absence, devoured by the very chaos they unleashed. The rise of an empire. And from that chaos rose something far greater than the conspirators could have imagined: the Roman Empire. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, seized the moment. He took the loyalty of the people, the strength of the legions, and the memory of Caesar, forging them into a weapon. Within a generation, Octavian would become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The irony is sharp. The men who killed Caesar to prevent monarchy ended by giving Rome an emperor. Their rebellion did not save the republic, it accelerated its death. Their betrayal birthed the very empire they feared. The eternal lesson, so what remains of the conspirators? Not statues, not triumphs, not songs of glory, only shadows. Their names echo, not as heroes, but as warnings. Casca, Brutus, Cassius, Decimus, Trebonius all thought they were liberators. All ended in ruin, and Caesar, though struck down on the Senate floor, he became immortal. His death gave birth to a dynasty. His name became the very title of kings. Caesar would echo not just in Rome, but across centuries in Kaisers and czars, in thrones and empires yet unborn. Closing words. The story of Caesar's conspirators is not one of victory. It is the story of men who thought they could control destiny only to be consumed by it. They struck at Caesar's flesh, but they could not kill his legacy. In betraying him, they betrayed themselves and ensured that Caesar's shadow would rule the world forever. Perhaps we will never know if the senators truly believed they were saving Rome or if they were simply blinded by envy and fear. But history has already passed its verdict. Every hand that struck Caesar was punished. Every dagger turned back on its wielder. None escaped. None were remembered as heroes. And yet, Julius Caesar, though betrayed and slain, achieved a kind of immortality that no blade could take away. His name lives on, not as a mere man, but as a symbol of power echoing in the Kaisers of Germany, the Tsars of Russia, and in every empire that dared to claim eternity. The conspirators vanished into dust, but Caesar's shadow still rules the ages. And so we must ask ourselves, was it worth it? Did their betrayal change Rome, or did it only seal its destiny? Epic orchestral music swells images of Caesar's statue illuminated by fire. Rome in chaos, fading into the calm majesty of the Colosseum centuries later. This was not just the story of an assassination. It was the story of betrayal, punishment, and legacy. And it reminds us that history is not kind to those who believe they can master fate. If this story intrigued you, don't let it end here. Smash the like button to honor Caesar's memory. Share this tale with fellow history seekers. Hidden betrayals and the legends that shaped our world. Because here, history is not just remembered, it is unveiled.